Welcome to the Audubon Society of Central Maryland webinar, Farmland Raptors, a Farmers and Birders' Best Friends, presented by Chris Eberly, Executive Director of the Maryland Bird Conservation Partnership. Chris coordinated the Department of Defense's Bird Conservation Program, DoD Partners in Flight, for 17 years, and previously served as Executive Director of the Gulf Coast Bird Observatory. And there he is, he just came on screen. He strives to connect people to birds through Bird City, Maryland, the Maryland Bald Eagle Nest Monitoring Program, and the Farmland Raptor Program. He is also currently president of the Anne Arundel Bird Club. Today, he will be speaking to us about American kestrels and barn owls, their population status, causes for declines, and how community science efforts like the Farmland Raptor Program offer optimism for their future. And with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to Chris.
All right, let me pull this up. Thank you, Angela, and thank you to Audubon Society of Central Maryland for having me this evening. It's a real pleasure to talk with everybody. I was looking through the list of names earlier today from the registration and do recognize a lot of the names out there. And for the rest of you that I don't know, I'm very glad that you're joining us tonight. I am going to throw in chimney swifts in addition to the kestrels and barn owls tonight. Since Maryland Bird Conservation Partnership is working on a program that essentially involves nesting structures for a lot of birds. So that's an added bonus for tonight. So I'm trying to modify here, give a little bit of help to Smokey. You know, he needs to start having some nest boxes on the end of his post there instead of just the shovel. The mission of the Maryland Bird Conservation Partnership focuses on native wild bird populations throughout Maryland and their habitats, as well as partnerships with public and private entities. And we like to really engage communities and people who live there in a lot of these actions. What we envision is a Maryland landscape that is healthy and sustainable for not just birds, but also for communities and those who live in them. And I think, as Angela mentioned, I put a lot of places, we strive to connect birds, habitats, and people throughout the state. So I'm just going to start with a little bit of maybe depressing news, but I think it's news that everybody needs to at least be aware of. The report came out in Science magazine last fall that was the result of a lot of research and analysis by largely, I guess, the Partners in Flight scientific working group led by Cornell, American Bird Conservancy, and others. It showed that over the last 50 years, we have essentially lost about 1 in 4 of birds during the breeding population in North America. It's actually a little more than 1 in 4. It's 29%, and through all their analysis, they estimated that back in 1970, there were about 10 billion birds in the breeding population in 1970, and that has declined down to almost 7 billion birds. Among these declines are a number of different groupings of birds, aerial insectivores, which chimney swifts are one of those, but also the swallows, nightjars, things of that nature have declined by 32%. Grassland birds may be one of the hardest hit of any grouping. In particular, eastern meadowlarks, we've lost about 75% of our eastern meadowlarks in the last 50 years, which is pretty alarming. if you've ever been to grassland areas, you kind of know why that's happening. And long-distance migratory birds, we've lost about 30% of those. Baltimore Oriole, our state bird, we've lost about 40%, 2 in 5 of Baltimore Orioles in the last 50 years. There is some good news, however. Raptor populations have added 15 million birds since 1970. And I think a lot of us can think about osprey, bald eagles, peregrines, things that were really decimated by DDT. So conservation actions to eliminate the worst pesticides like DDT, I think, have really led to a strong comeback in a number of these raptor species. So then the next question that I think, to my mind at least, logically comes up is what's killing North America's birds? It's very surprising to a lot of people that free-ranging cats, and these are both domestic and feral cats, are responsible for conservatively 2.6 billion deaths of birds in US and Canada every year. Collisions with windows and buildings, over 500,000 or 500 million birds. You can see some of the others as we go down the list. And I'm showing at the bottom here this 3billionbirds.org website. I would encourage you to go there, take a look at the resources. There are a lot of good resources to have. One of these is 7 simple actions to help birds. And these are 7 simple actions that everybody can engage with and take. And everybody doing a little part will go a long way. Tonight, what I'm going to focus on, the Farmland Raptor and Chimney Swift programs really deal with this community science, something we used to call citizen science, now broadening it out to community science. So I just want to give a little background on the breeding bird atlas approach to sampling birds, since I'm using some of those examples. So breeding bird atlas is generally something that is done at the state level. Places like San Diego County, California, I have their atlas of breeding birds. It's actually thicker than either of the Maryland breeding bird atlases that we have done. But it really is to look at the distribution and relative abundance of birds within the given geography. Maryland actually was one of the first states to do a breeding bird atlas back in the mid-'80s. The second atlas project happened almost 20 years after that, or about 20 years after that. And we have embarked on the third atlas of breeding birds of Maryland and the District of Columbia. That just started this year. We pretty much have finished up the bulk of nesting for most species. The main difference between the first 2 atlases and this third atlas is that we are using eBird for all the data entry, the data collection for people. And what the benefit of that is, I just took this snapshot today from the website. If you go to ebird.org, and then you can search for the Maryland, D.C. Breeding Bird Atlas to find that portal. It shows literally up to the minute of what we have. So the second atlas, I think we had 206 confirmed breeding species. After just the first season, so far we have 186 already. We've had 875 people submit 53,000 checklists, and you can see the largest counties in terms of confirmed species and effort hours. So thanks to everybody who has participated so far. It is a great, fun project to do. I'd encourage you to check out the eBird Atlas portal website. So let me dive into talking about kestrels, American kestrel. Usually if I do this talk to people that I can see live in the audience, I'll say, does anybody have an idea what the scientific name, Falco sparvarius, means? So I'll have you ponder that. It's funny. No, I've always been intrigued by scientific names, Latin names. It really helped me learn bird species when I was in grad school learning them. So the genus Falco which is all the falcons, refers to the falcate or hooked shape of the beak. The species name, the specific name, Sparvarius, means pertaining to a sparrow, referring to the bird's small size and hunting of sparrows as a typical prey. So the common colloquial name, which a lot of you may have heard at some point, is not surprisingly the sparrowhawk. So that's my little trivia for bird one tonight. There are 13 kestrel species throughout the world. The American kestrel is the only one found in the Americas, which basically is the Western Hemisphere. Interestingly, there are as many as 17 recognized subspecies of kestrel, from Alaska all the way down to Tierra del Fuego at the very southern tip of South America. A lot of these kestrels are resident species. They do not migrate. There are some interesting physical differences in plumage, appearance, patterns, things of that nature. So this is a map from eBird checklists. The Cornell lab has done a great job animating weekly estimated relative abundance based on eBird sightings and then some crazy modeling that they do on a supercomputer. If you go to eBird and check out science, they have, I think, over 600 species that they now have available to look at this stuff. But what this will show, you can see it's going through the year and just showing where the estimated relative abundance of kestrels are throughout the Western Hemisphere. And you can see starting in January, there's movements, not great movements. I guess most of the migration might take place from places like Alaska and Canada down into the US for species that have to get out of the cold and find available food sources. There's another neat site, the Nest Watch site, which is also a Cornell lab site, has an all about birdhouses section, which has kestrel and barn owl information. I thought I would just throw up some of that here. It'll show basically the known nesting periods, which is the most of the range, and right around here is kind of when we would expect it. For kestrels, you'll find these birds in open grassland areas, the edges of towns mostly, or towns that have a lot of open areas, and then open woodlands. They don't like dense woods. It shows attaching a nest box to a building, a tree, a post. A little bit about nest placement, minimum spacing, and there are actually some plans that you can download from that site. So in terms of population status for kestrel, it is a species of greatest conservation need in 12 of the 14 Northeast states, which are the 14 Northeast states are defined by the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, which has Northeast, Southeast, Midwest, and Western regions. Looking at the distribution of kestrels in Maryland from the second breeding bird atlas, you can see for the most part, they nest where there's open farms, grasslands, and getting up here in the prairie or the Piedmont area. Carroll County, Frederick County, those areas are where you're going to find them the most often. You'll find kestrels. Another part of the story, though, shows that kestrels in most regions of the country, all except the Southeast, are declining in numbers. And when we look at the change from the first to the second breeding bird atlas in Maryland, we can see the decline in the number of blocks, atlas blocks, that had confirmed breeding, probable breeding, possible breeding, and just total evidence of breeding activity down by anywhere from 25 to 40%. To look at these numbers, I guess, in a little more detail, which unfortunately I always like to do, at the top here is from the Partners in Flight It's kind of a combination of the Population Assessment Database and the Avian Conservation Assessment Database, the Population Estimates Database, I'm sorry. Looking at population numbers. Now, I showed you the change from this first to the second breeding bird atlas. I think what's more telling is this change by block, where the red triangles show where the first atlas we had kestrels detected as evidence of breeding. But in the second atlas, those blocks no longer had evidence of kestrels breeding. The green circle is where just the opposite, where the first atlas had no records of kestrels breeding, but the second atlas did. You can see here there are a lot more of the red triangles than the green circles, and you can see where a lot of these are concentrated are areas which have really boomed between early 80s and early 2000s population-wise, with urbanization coming out from DC and Baltimore, and even down from the Northeast a little bit. So it's not totally surprising. Within Maryland, the Appalachian Mountains region has showed a decline from the breeding bird atlas data. The Piedmont region, where most of the kestrel population seems to be found nowadays, also had a fairly significant decline over 50 years in breeding bird atlas, or breeding bird survey data. And the coastal plain has showed also a drop, a pretty significant drop in these populations. So the next question is, well, why? Why are kestrels declining? There are a number of factors, and I don't know that we have one single factor that we can say is the smoking gun, so to speak, that's causing the big problem. Remember when West Nile virus came out, it started right there in New York and spread that way. So the Northeast was one of those areas that was initially hit the hardest, and then it spread westward. I think a lot of species, corvids, crows and blue jays and things like that, really took a hit. Birds that are more social in nature, but kestrels also did took a hit from West Nile, and I think they've slowly built up some defenses to that. Another very interesting one is Cooper's hawks, and here you can see a Cooper's hawk that has predated a kestrel. Kestrel hawk or Cooper's hawks are increasing as much as kestrels were declining. The Cooper's hawk increase has been spectacular, if not greater. Here we can see in the Piedmont region, we have increased Cooper's hawk blocks that Cooper's hawks were detected as having breeding evidence by over 1,000%. The upper Chesapeake is basically the upper eastern shore. You can see overall within the state, the number of blocks increased by 226%. Cooper's hawks, I think, kind of like urbanization. They like to follow bird feeders, and they also find things like kestrels. So here you can see the green circles, like I mentioned before. The red triangles for kestrels were much greater than the green circles. We'll look at the growth of where Cooper's hawks really sprung up. And right in this area, in the getting into the Piedmont, is where kestrels took one of the biggest hits. And we can see the breeding bird survey results for Cooper's hawks on a very upward trend. Another reason for kestrels and barn owls and a lot of other species are pesticides. Sprayed on food, sprayed in our lawns, sprayed on fields that kill rodents for the most part, or small birds. Kestrels and barn owls will feed on these species that have been poisoned, and they come down with secondary poisoning, which can be a very agonizing source of mortality for them. Perhaps One of the bigger declines, I would say, is the shift to urbanization. And a lot of urbanization has taken place in areas that used to look like this, that were good. You can see the barn back there, you know, good potential for barn owls in these open fields, good for kestrels. A lot of these areas now look like this. They've just taken over in certain areas. Nesting structures, kestrels will nest in tree cavities or nest boxes if available. But as you put in all these subdivisions, you're going to lose all the standing dead trees. And, you know, a lot of the homeowner associations require grass to be a certain way, and a lot of the chemical companies, the grass companies that come out and spray your lawn, that's not good for anything. To look at where kestrels like to nest, New Jersey has done a very extensive nest box program, and they did a lot of survey where there were successful broods raised in nest boxes. They sampled the area to find out what was the habitat around there. Crops, pasture lands, about half of the areas where they had successful broods. So again, these open areas, and the crops is generally not row crops. It's these open, more open areas. Other is just whatever's not ag wetlands or rural residential or forests with greater than 50% crown closure, which is not the open woodland, but more of a dense forest. So just to give you an idea of what the preference is, at least in New Jersey, which I think really can apply to Maryland. So now we'll shift over to barn owl. Taito Alba. There's your second quiz for the day. Taito Alba, what does that mean? That's the scientific name. Well, Taito Alba literally means white owl. The Taito is, and I love this word, it's the onomatopoeic ancient Greek Taito, which has a very funny spelling, which means an owl, and then the Latin alba, which means white. So barn owl literally means white owl. The distribution of barn owl is worldwide. This is one of the most widespread species in the world. You can see it throughout the Western Hemisphere, US, Central, South America, Europe, Africa, Asia, India, Australia, a lot of the Pacific Islands, including Hawaii. So it is a worldwide species. Somebody had wrote one of the questions as they were registering, mentioning how barn owls have been used sort of as a symbol of peace in the Middle East. And this article came out in Nature, coming up on 3 years ago now, about Owls for Peace, how conservation science is reaching across borders in the Middle East. And this is exactly that program that has gotten significant attention. I believe even up through the Pope is aware of these things. They put up thousands of barn owl nest boxes throughout Israel, the Palestinian territories, Jordan. Just an amazing thing. And here you see a farmer in Jordan holding one of the owls, and right here, Yossi Leshem, that's the guy who really started this whole program. I had the real pleasure to meet him a couple of times, and he is just one of those people. He'll tell you a story about anything you want to know about birds, and it's because he's experienced it. But he has been such an ambassador and been able to talk to both sides, all sides, to get this going. And I think one of the most interesting things to me was this picture they showed about a barn owl reared in Israel, and I think Tel Aviv, Israel. You can see on the ring, or the band, as we call them in this country, that formed a breeding pair with a barn owl reared in Jordan, across the border. I mean, talk about international collaboration. I don't think it gets much better than that. So barn owls habit made. They are cool in so many ways. So within the Western Hemisphere, I'll show you this animated map of the estimated relative abundance. And you can see barn owls, for the most part, have a number of subpopulations that are resident. So you can see little bits of movement, but not really a lot of migration that's going on. And if you notice in the northeast, you won't see a whole lot. And the reason is because barn owls are somewhat hard to sample. They don't get detected by the Breeding Bird Survey. Breeding Bird Atlas projects have to go make special nighttime excursions to find them. All right, see where we go. So it's sort of a problem in being able to know where barn owls are and how many there are. The All About Birdhouses site, here's some information about barn owls. So you can see they start nesting early in the year. Will nest through July. Out west, they will nest in the desert. I'm not sure if they nest in cactus or not, but I know a few raptors will nest in cactus, including Kestrel. You can find them around marsh areas, again, the open grasslands and open woodlands. Some information there. And again, barn owl nest box information can be downloaded from this site. To look at the numbers of barn owls and how they're doing population-wise, worldwide, they're really doing well. Globally, they have increased over the last 50 years by about half. And here you can see the population size, the threats to breeding, the breeding distribution and the non-breeding distribution are very low. This is globally, so they're pretty safe in terms of their distribution. Now, continentally here, the threats to the breeding habitat, threats to non-breeding habitat, and population trends are about in the middle. This is a scale of 1 to 5. So they're doing okay. When we start to get down to even more regional levels, we can see that barn owl populations in the Northeast and Midwest are declining. So they're not quite doing as well. In fact, 13 of the 14 Northeast states have this bird listed as a species of greatest conservation need. So again, like kestrels, a lot of the problem with what's happening to barn owl populations, especially in the Northeast, disappearance of farmland, which they prefer. A lot of it lost to urban development. Some of the farms, you know, they do like to nest in barns. They will nest in tree cavities as well. They are a cavity nester. So as farming disappears, some of the barns are taken down. People buy up farms and they close up the barns and, you know, seal up all the holes. They're losing nesting habitat. Again, the nesting data is hard to come by, so we don't have a really good idea of what's going on. This was the distribution, the number of blocks where there was confirmed breeding activity, either probable, confirmed, or possible in the second Breeding Bird Atlas. Comparing it to the first atlas, you can see there's a lot of these red triangles where we've lost breeding activity in atlas blocks. Now, I think one caveat that needs to be thrown in here is in the first atlas, there were at least one, maybe two people who really spent a lot of time searching for and checking on breeding status of barn owls around the state. In the second atlas, the level of effort for that was greatly diminished. So these red triangles may not truly dictate or indicate what's going on. But from the first to second atlas, you can see, you know, 70% or so loss in the number of blocks where we had breeding activity. and it's pretty well evenly distributed. 100% loss in Allegheny, but that was only 3 previously to 0. So it's we need to do better with this current atlas in surveying for barn owls. Now, this was something interesting that I came upon a while back. That red outline is called the Great Valley of Eastern North America. And that stands out as a real significant habitat for the management of grassland birds, which include barn owls, kestrels, other grassland birds. This area generally has a continued focus on agriculture, which is why it remains a fairly good area for habitat for a lot of these grassland type birds. This yellow triangle, I just wanted to put a reference about where Frederick, Maryland is, just to give you some idea. Virginia Society of Ornithology has a very active barn owl nest box program that runs through this Great Valley in Virginia. Hawk Mountain Sanctuary has another one that hits some of these areas in Pennsylvania. So what we're going to try to do is get something going in here, but everywhere else that we can have good potential to boost barn owl and kestrel populations. I'd mentioned the urbanization before, so you can see still a good bit of agricultural lands up here, Frederick, Carroll counties. This is where all the urbanization happened, and if you remember the loss of kestrels from the atlas, a lot of those red triangles were kind of right in here, Harford, southern Harford County, down through Prince George's, Charles, and into Calvert County. So that was sort of one of the things that helped spawn creating this Maryland Farmland Raptor program. The other thing was that Calvert County Natural Resources Division was working on the Patuxent River Barn Owl project, focusing in the Patuxent River corridor, which is probably now the biggest nesting area for barn owls in the state of Maryland. So in talking with those guys, they were all in terms of wanting to expand this into a statewide effort. The benefit of doing something like this is now that they had developed recovery goals and the objectives for recovering populations of barn owls and subsequently kestrels. And the first thing really is to assess the population. So looking at eBird data, looking at breeding bird atlas data, breeding bird survey data, but knowing that there are some limitations with those, going out and really monitoring all the nest boxes that are out there. We want to do this in a standardized way so that across the state we can create a system so that everybody's collecting data, the same data, collecting it in the same way, so that we can do analysis that makes sense across the state. And Virginia, Pennsylvania, New Jersey are also doing similar type programs, so we can actually look at this data from a regional perspective and get a much better assessment of what's going on with populations. We want to identify where the most significant habits are, protect those where we can, and where we have the opportunity to try to restore some of these open grassland habitats, farmland habitats. The habitat also including the nesting areas, nest sites. So the overall goal, we want to increase the availability of nest sites. Natural cavities, we want to encourage everybody to keep natural cavities for any kind of cavity nesting species. I think if you remember back when the eastern bluebird went into serious decline, it was largely because of the loss of natural tree cavities. We know the success of bluebird nest box programs throughout the entire country, in fact, that has been hugely successful, but it's almost surprising to me when I see a pair of bluebirds nesting in a tree cavity. I have to remind myself, yeah, this is what they used to do before we put up nest boxes for them. Kestrels and barn owls, kind of the same way. So where we don't have natural nest sites available, we want to work on installing artificial sites, which would be these nest boxes. So the public awareness side of this is twofold. One, we want to make people aware of the situation with barn owls and kestrels, that they are good. They eat a lot of the things that we don't want around. For farmers, I think that was the one thing that really helped Yossi Leshem sell the story over in the Middle East, is that they were using a lot of pesticides over there. And of course, that has just secondary poisoning problems for all kinds of raptors that he was seeing. Once the farmers saw how well barn owls took care of their rodent problem, they really cut down on their rodenticide use and only would use it when absolutely necessary. Barn owls are voracious in their appetite for mice, for voles, for things like that. They will take 6,000 or 7,000 of these individuals during a nesting season. So that is something that I think you can sell any farmer on, that's going to help with whatever it is they're growing. And then also we want to raise the awareness about the opportunity to build and install nest boxes. And with this Farmland Raptor program, that we are going to work on the volunteer network, which I envision to be at Audubon chapter level or a Maryland Ornithological Society chapter level, in terms of recruiting volunteers to get volunteers out monitoring and entering the data from that. And so here are some closing shots, perhaps, of Farmland Raptors. You can see the nest boxes, the different types. Barn owls, they do like barns, but they will nest. This is a Calvert County project in a marshy area, and it's surprising that they do very well in those areas, just as well as open farmland area. And then kestrels, one of the things I'm hoping we can raise funds for to get cameras to put inside some of the nest boxes, because I think nest cams are just all the rage these days, and they're everywhere, and they're addicting, and they're fun to watch, and you can actually see the brood of whatever it is, barn owls, kestrels, growing up, and watch the parents come in and feed them, and then watch them fledge. So it's one of those programs that can be a lot of fun. It's very engaging, and it's going to do a lot of good for the farmland raptors in our state. So I also want to just mention chimney swifts, because I know there has been some interest in this within Central Maryland Audubon and a few of the MOS chapters around there. Okay, quiz number 3. Kitura pelagica. Any guesses? Well, I'll tell you. So Kitura, the genus name, is a combination of two ancient Greek words. Kaite, which means bristle or spine, which you can see they have these little bristles on their tail, and ura, which means tail. So basically, Kitura means bristletail. The species name Pelagica is derived from the Greek word pelagikos, which means of the seas. And this is really thought to be a reference to its nomadic lifestyle rather than any reference to the sea. So it's really a highly migratory bird with a bristle tail. And the other Kitura species, the Voxus swift, it looks somewhat similar, but it is the western counterpart to that. The eBird results of chimney swifts, this is kind of showing during the breeding season, the average of peak breeding season, where you can find chimney swifts throughout the U.S. The animated map will show you sort of now. These birds winter down in the Amazon in South America, and I guess there just are not enough eBird reports down there yet for them to do a chimney swift animation including South America. But you can see April, they start to come up, May, June, July, August, September, they get in these pre-migratory roosts, October, and then boom, they just head out very quickly. And this is, to me, this is really, I mean, this is so cool because you can actually see where they come up, how they come up, where they're heaviest, you know, up around our area, and then boom, around November, there's none. They just all head on out. Population-wise, chimney swifts are in that group of aerial insectivores that were declining overall by 32% as a group for the last 50 years. This species is listed on the IUCN Red List as vulnerable, which is not a good thing, because it means populations are not doing well, and the Breeding Bird Survey does pick up chimney swifts fairly well. And you can see, generally, we're looking at more than 10% decline per year with these birds. So throughout the range, the news is not good. And just looking, well, looking back the Breeding Bird Survey trends, you can see this downward trend. And most of the chimney swifts in Maryland are found within this coastal plain, about 60,000 out of 100,000, so about 60% are here. 30% in the Piedmont, and another 10% out here in the West. So looking at this Partners in Flight Avian Conservation Assessment database, the threats to the breeding ground are 4 out of 5. And pretty much what that means, breeding habitat for chimney swifts are chimneys. We're losing chimneys. People are capping chimneys. Different types of heating systems, they're lined in a way that aren't good for swifts, so they're capped. Or, new houses are being built that just simply don't have chimneys. The population trend is 5 out of 5. That's as high as you can get. And what we've seen over the last 50 years is a 67% population decline of chimney swifts. So 2/3, we've lost 2/3 of our chimney swifts in 50 years. Based on Breeding Bird Survey data and trends, the half-life based on Breeding Bird Survey data is 27 years, which means in another 27 years, we'll lose an additional 50% of that remaining population if we don't do anything. If that is not a call to action, I don't know what is. They're fairly widely distributed throughout Maryland, but you can see we've lost a bunch. Haven't lost a lot in terms of numbers, but we just don't have a lot. Maryland may not be as bad as some states is kind of what I'm looking at for that. Now, chimneys, right here you can see a natural chimney and a little bird in there clinging on to the side. They actually have 3 toes. I forget the term, diatacal or something, but 2 toes in the front, 1 in the back, but they can bring that back toe up to the front. Use all 3 toes on each foot to hang on the sides. They cannot perch. They just hang on. And you can see the nest is just little sticks that they use their saliva as glue, which becomes very strong. It's almost like avian super glue. And it's stuck on the side, so it's like a half-cup nest. And then the young are in there. Here's a look at Audubon Society of Western Pennsylvania, one of the about 150 chimney swift towers that they put up. An interesting thing to note is that in any given nesting structure, a chimney or a swift tower, there is only ever 1 nesting pair. There may be other chimneys roosting in there, but there's only ever 1 pair that is actually nesting. Now, when we get into post breeding season, pre-migratory roosts are a big thing. And if you've ever seen, well, I have a slide to show that next, but here is one. This is in Ontario, Canada. This was actually a chimney from an old building that they saved, that the building was torn down, but you can see there are probably thousands of swifts just stacked in there. So this is after they're done nesting. They gather in these large roosts, and as they start to move southward, these roosts get bigger and bigger and bigger. Richmond has an old industrial smokestack that I think they get 7 to maybe 10,000 swifts. At least, 5 or 10 years ago they did. I'm not sure what the status is now. But this is a small chimney and a very small number of swifts coming in. Look around for large chimneys. They'll still be around right now, but what happens is all these chimneys are flying around, foraging. As it gets close to dusk, they'll start coming in closer and closer, and when it gets real close to dusk, you'll start to see what looks like a tornado, this swirling vortex around the chimney. And then all of a sudden, at some point, it just starts going down into the chimney, one after another, sometimes in streams. And it is one of the most spectacular avian spectacles that I think I've ever seen. I had the fortune to be out in Portland, Oregon one time to witness boxes swift doing this thing. And it's an elementary school in the edge of Portland with this huge hillside, and it's a community event. Hundreds of people line this hillside, bring blankets, they bring picnic baskets. There were a couple of vendors selling food. When I was there, one kid was selling cookies with swifts on them that he was trying to raise money to go to college, which was just so cool. But they had, I think, close to 20,000 swifts that went down this chimney. And when the first ones started going and they started streaming down, the hillside erupted in cheers. It was just, and these are people that are not birders for the most part, I think. It's just one of those cool things. So here's that swift tower again, freestanding swift tower, with or without this interpretive kiosk with panels. But this, and you don't need that kiosk if you're just putting it out in a farm field somewhere and it's not going to be, a lot of the public coming in. But when you do have a lot of the public coming in, this is a fantastic outreach tool. Talk about your Audubon chapter, talk about the birds, talk about migration, talk about something else. They can be mounted on top of buildings. This is a little bit larger chimney, artificial, that might be in an area, it looks sort of New Englandish, that might get some swifts in migration coming in. Our chimney swift conservation program has a lot of the same background in formation and purpose as the Farmland Raptor program. We want to really look at stabilizing and hopefully beginning to increase chimney swift populations throughout Maryland. And we do have similar recovery goal objectives. Again, assess the population. One of the things I'd really like to be able to start doing is sending out surveys to places to find out where people have swifts nesting in their chimneys, in their house, just to get an assessment of how many chimneys are actually used, and then find out what the condition of that chimney is, and hopefully they'll continue with that. But then also, where are any swift towers that are in existence right now? I drive around and sometimes see one, but I'm not sure if all of them are kept up. But I just want to find out where are all the nesting availabilities right now. And then we want to, again, increase the availability of nest sites, focusing on primarily the existing nesting habitat, which again, their nesting habitat is a chimney. Occasionally, you can find some in tree cavities, but we really want to get the word out to people that chimneys are important, especially if you have a swift nesting there. They usually will come back to that same chimney year after year. Where there are not available chimneys or a shortage of them, then we will look at building towers. The public awareness is a huge part of this. Again, targeting homeowners and businesses that have chimneys, just educate them about how swifts use the chimney, what problems they do not pose in your chimney, and to let them know that the shrieking sound of babies is not a banshee or a demon or anything like that. It's just babies crying for food, and they will go away when they fledge. With kestrels, barn owls, and chimney swifts, one of the things I think you really need to educate people on and emphasize is what I call the cool factor. Having a swift around, just seeing how they operate, they're just, I mean, to me, it's one of my favorite birds. Barn owls, to see a barn owl, at dusk flying over a field is just, you get chills down your spine. And then kestrels, I mean, they're just our smallest falcon. They're so colorful, and they generally tolerate humans better than a lot of other raptors. So the cool factor, I think, can really help in selling a lot of these programs. Here are just a few of the groups that we've had contact with who have shown interest. I know this is not all of them, but I just want to see this is what we want to do with these programs, is to engage these bird clubs, Audubon chapters, MOS chapters, getting involved with this kind of thing. And I just wanted to hit this again, the 7 simple actions, things that you can do. Make windows safer. Windows kill up to 1 billion birds each year. There are ways to do that. Community science, so get involved with the Farmland Raptors, chimney swifts, Christmas bird count, e-birding, the Atlas, helping to monitor IB important bird areas. Keep your cats indoors. It's better for the cats. Average lifespan of an indoor cat is about 12 years. Outdoor free-ranging cat is about 2 to 3. Reduce plastic use, especially focused now, like a lot of groups are, on these single-use plastic like straw, shopping bags, things of that nature. Plant natives. They're better for birds. They don't need as much water, less fertilizer, less pesticide. You can reduce the amount of grass you have in your yard. Buy shade-grown coffee. I'll put a shameless plug to a link on our website, marylandbirds.org/coffee, that we have a partnership with Birds and Beans Coffee. And I'll tell you, it's the only coffee I've been drinking for years. It's really good coffee. Think of a coffee bean as like a tomato. The coffee bean is actually a fruit. It's the inside of what you see on the thing. And when it's vine-ripened tomatoes, shade-grown coffee grows slower, and it's just a better bean. And again, avoid pesticides. We've heard a lot about the neonicotinoids. They're just bad for birds. Rodenticides, as we were talking earlier, that can impact mice and voles. Those are eaten by raptors, including owls and kestrels, and can lead to their poisoning. So I hope you will consider joining us in helping not just kestrels and barn owls and chimney swifts, but all of Maryland's birds. It's up to us, and I know the people I've talked to are very excited about this. I'd be glad to work with any of you on any aspect of this. Go to the marylandbirds.org website, and then my email is there. Angela, I forget if the email was posted anywhere else. director@marylandbirds.org. I guess, yeah, maybe you can put that in the chat. That is all I have presentation-wise. So did any questions come in that we might want to address?
Yes, we do have a few. And before we go into those, I wanted to mention we do have a chimney swift tower at our Fred Archibald Sanctuary, which is in New Market in Frederick County.
Okay.
An Eagle Scout built it for us some years ago.
Okay.
And we did actually, earlier this year, we put a ladder up. We found both an old nest and an active nest, which did later this year, successfully fledge.
Nice.
So I'm not sure that we've ever seen the roost, but it sounds like if we do, we should like plan some sort of festival. And
well, you know, I would wonder if there is some place in Frederick that has a chimney. You know, I took my son's Cub Scout troop to a downtown chimney in Warrenton, Virginia, where I was living. And we counted 200 going down into just a regular sized chimney. So it doesn't have to be a huge chimney just to get that. And we were standing there with binoculars ready to count, and you wouldn't believe the traffic. People walking by, just, what are you looking at? Whoa, and then we ended up like with 30 people standing there watching the whole spectacle. So, you know, look in towns, because they'll generally be in a town, I think, for these roosts. Just look for a lot of swifts flying around right about now. And if you see, you know, a good number of them, then you can bet there's probably a chimney somewhere nearby to go look.
Yes, and Dr. Kendall in the chat, he's one of our partners at Hood College in Frederick, noted that he recalls seeing the roosting spectacle while growing up in Chicago in the 1960s. So it definitely sounds like if you're a birder, this is an event that you want to seek out.
Yeah. Oh, it's a blast. No doubt about it.
So we'll move on to some of the questions that have come in. The first one, let's see, we'll try to prioritize some of these. So what would you say to reassure farmers who have concerns about the larger raptors, such as red-tailed hawks, being a threat to their chicken flocks if we are trying to encourage the farmers to be more habitable to these species?
That's a good one. You know, I don't have a lot of experience dealing with that type of thing. I think in general it's just going to be the little ones that are going to be taken more. Now maybe a bald eagle would take a full-grown chicken, but generally I don't think during the nesting season they're scouring chicken farms. They're usually scouring the rivers in the bay. Red-tailed hawks, I think adult chickens are probably a little big for them as well. That's, you know, I don't know for sure, but I generally don't hear a lot about hawks taking chickens. If they're free-ranging chickens, I think the biggest threat would be before they're fully grown. While they're, you know, small, much more vulnerable that way.
Okay. We had a question about whether barn owls and barred owls will share territory. I believe barred owls are generally pretty adaptive and probably on the increase. So would there be any?
Yeah, barred owls.
Is there any competition there?
Generally not, because generally you're going to find them in different areas. Barred owls are really forest owls. Especially, you know, if there's a stream going through kind of like a riparian forest area, bottomland. But they're forest birds, and barn owls generally like open woodlands, which it's not quite the same mix. And I think they're about the same relative size, so I don't think predation one on the other is an issue. Now, great horned owls will predate a number of things, but I don't even think they'll go as big as barred owls or barn owls on a general basis. Saw-whet owls and screech owls, yes. But yeah, generally barred and barn owls, they're going to coexist if they're in the same area, but they generally won't be in the same exact area.
But we definitely have a lot of barn owls in Frederick County, at least, and not as many barn owls.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, well, barred owls sound a whole lot more friendly than barn owls.
Yes. Someone asked if about breeding box examples and dimensions for barn owls. Are there any resources or online places that we could direct people to? They would be looking to place it inside their bank barn, their bank barn with a proper size hole to the outside.
Yeah, there are a lot of barn owl box building plans. I was talking, with Calvert County guys today, and it seems that there are too many in some ways. That there may be something that will be more beneficial to Maryland, the Mid-Atlantic area, in terms of a design that's worked better. So we're in the process of essentially developing a guide to nest boxes. It would be barn owls and kestrels. Kestrels are a lot more straightforward, but barn owls, placement is very important. Generally, they should be inside a barn, not on the outside, but they can be on poles. They can be wedged in a tree, things like that. But the actual design, size of the hole is pretty standard, but how close to the top and how far from the bottom, I've seen a number of different plans. So if you go to that All About Birdhouses page on NestWatch, they do have plans that you can download. And I think that's one of the more widely recognized set of plans that have been very successful in a lot of areas. But hopefully within a month or less, we'll have something on our website on the Farmland Raptor page, and then on the Farmland Raptor page about designs and plans and all that for nest boxes.
We'll definitely look for that, and we'll share that resource when it becomes available for sure.
Yeah, I'll let you know when we have an update on
that. Someone asked how they can attract these birds to their backyard. So, and you've already addressed some of these issues about leaving the dead trees, and probably less mowing always helps everything alive. So
yeah, it does. Kestrels, unless your backyard's really big, or has access to an adjoining field, it's going to be a little difficult. But if there's a big open area on your property or at the edge of your property, you can put up a kestrel box and see if they come into it. One of the things we're looking at for all of these species is whether that adage, if you build it, they will come, will actually happen. And I know swift towers in particular have had very mixed results. I don't know much about success with kestrel boxes, but I think if it's good foraging habitat, you might have good luck. And we actually, I think, may even have more kestrels in the non-breeding time than in the breeding time. So they might use them as a roost box as well. Barn owls, with populations as low as they are, I'll have to talk to those guys with Calvert County to see about how they have worked at trying to attract owls in certain areas. But I think they've said if there's any owl anywhere near and you put up a box where they haven't had an opportunity before, they'll find it. And then swift towers, I think generally closer to a building seems to be better, but it's not always a requirement. Because I think, you think of a search image for a bird looking for a nesting area, and swifts are looking for a chimney, which is on a house or a building. So I think their search image kind of hones into these more populated areas. But again, these are things that we're going to try to do some experimentation on, hopefully very positively, so we don't put up structures where they don't get used.
We do actually, since you mentioned that, we have a kestrel box at our Fred Archibald Sanctuary, also the same one that has the tower. And to my knowledge, it has not ever been used by kestrels. And we also don't tend to see kestrels at our sanctuaries for some reason. So I don't know if we're doing something wrong or if they're just not in the area.
Yeah. But when I need to go out there and take a look. I don't know what kind of habitat that is. If it's is it really open area?
It's an old field and bordered by horse farm. So yeah, it's fairly open.
Sounds like that'd be good good habitat as we designated. Now kestrels may differ, but I don't know.
Yeah, well, we have the kestrel is the bird in our logo.
Yeah, that's right.
I've been told because we thought it was a really cool looking bird, so we thought we'd put it in our logo, but we don't actually see very much of it in our particular area where the sanctuaries are.
Well, and again, looking at the data that I showed earlier, that area has historically lost a lot of kestrels that used to be there.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe if the density is low enough, it's just a matter of one bird or a pair finding an available nest box.
Yeah, and there's a ton of residential development in the area, so I'm sure that has a lot to do with it.
Yeah, I mean, if at the sanctuary though, that should still be all right. But it might be good. It might be something to try to do a little more targeted survey with your chapter to during the nesting season, just really go out and try to find kestrels. Oh, it sounds like a good project for the Breeding Bird Atlas. Yeah, I mean, that'd be a good way to
think Dave is on this call, so he should take note of that.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, sometimes you target these species that are harder to find or lower in numbers or lower in abundance density.
So just building on the question about what is good habitat, someone asks about how should we think about whether to keep dead trees or cut them down. And I think generally, at least from Audubon, we recommend, keeping them unless they're, close to a structure and posing some sort of damage threat.
Yeah, that's pretty much the recommendation I make. I mean, if it poses a threat, you gotta eliminate danger, so cut it down. But if it's not gonna be a problem for a building or people, just leave them, because woodpeckers love them, bugs love them, which is you get woodpeckers and other things in there, and then you get nesting opportunities for all kinds of cavity nesting birds, titmice, nuthatches, small owls, things like that, even bluebirds.
Yep, and then when the trees fall, they return all those nutrients to the forest, so it's really important for that as well, the nutrient cycling.
It's the way it had worked for millennia before we came along.
Exactly. We have a few questions specific to swifts. So someone was asking if the swifts have any impact on chimneys, I guess, damage-wise, particularly residential chimneys.
No, they don't cause any damage. The nest will generally break down over a period of time if they fall off. When, like a lot of birds, when the parents are feeding the young, they'll carry the fecal sacs out. So there's generally not droppings that come down either. So there's not that potential hazardous material in there. Now, if there's a large roost, sometimes you'll get that guano type of thing at the bottom, but generally those are not going to be residential. And in terms of physically damaging, they really wouldn't be capable of that, and the glue that they use with their saliva just sticks on, and it breaks down over a long period of time. Now, another thing I'd like to do is start to reach out to chimney sweep companies and chimney masons and things like that. There's some people that don't like the noise, or for some other reason they don't. It's not that they object to chimney swifts, but if we can get chimney sweeps kind of working with the nesting cycle of chimney swifts, then they can go in after the nesting season, clean the chimney, including any nest that's on there, and then they'll be ready for using their fireplace over the winter. And then when the swifts come back, and they can start using it right away. Similarly, if people do like to cap their chimney for some reason in the winter, you can open it during the summer. But general reasons for capping it don't necessarily involve seasonal things. But yeah, chimney and chimney swifts, they go well together, and they don't hurt each other.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, just to think about the maintenance that you do during nesting season. And someone also mentioned in the chat to not cut down dead trees during the nesting season, or at least do a check first to make sure that nothing is nesting in it before you cut it down.
Yeah, not just dead trees. Because,
Right.
you get warblers and all those other things nesting in live trees.
Right.
It's always good to avoid a lot of activity of, cutting trees, trimming shrubs during the nesting season. But usually, with shrubbery, you can check out. But wrens and things like that just love shrubs that sometimes are in towns that get trimmed regularly. Dealing with the agricultural community and haying, eastern meadowlarks being down by 75%. A lot of that is just the two haying cycles. With cool season grasses, that's why you have cool season grasses, to get two cuttings, and each of the cuttings generally occur right at the peak of the nesting cycle. So that's another big issue, but that's a whole separate big issue. But yeah, trees are good. Just be careful when and how you cut them.
And someone asked if there are any records of Swiss nesting or roosting in silos.
I would think not. And I don't know a lot about silos, but I think the insides of silos are slick. Swifts need something to grab on, so brick is good. Or if you build these towers, it's roughed wood. So that they can cling on. If it's a smooth surface, they can't hang on, and so it won't work. And then generally they like something that's smaller. Most chimneys are within 12 inches square kind of thing. Some of the towers either 12 or 16 inches. So they don't like these huge, big round things. Now these industrial smokestacks. It's a little different because they will use those, but again, they're brick on the inside, the ones they use. So they have that surface that they can cling on to.
Okay, and one question that I wanted to save for last is it talks about climate change, and at Audubon we have put out research showing that 2/3 of all North American birds are at risk of extinction due to climate change. So this is a really key issue for our organization. But they were asking about the climate vulnerabilities of these 3 species.
Yeah, these 3 species probably are not high on the list of being vulnerable to climate change because of, well, kestrels and barn owls, it's what they're preying on. And, all the models, and I think Audubon's work has shown that agriculture and all that stuff is gradually going to shift northward. And so I think as that happens, the mice, the voles, all that prey will be moving northward, as will agriculture and farms and open fields. So I think they'll be able to move along. A lot of the problem with climate change and birds is the link to the habitat and the tree species, things of that nature. So as that shifts, things may not be able to keep up as much. Chimney swifts, I think the issue is not really one of climate change, but how is climate change maybe impacting insect populations? Because I think, we've heard of this insect Armageddon that's going on, which is why these aerial insectivore populations are declining. You drive down a country road, at least when I was a kid growing up, you do the windshield splat test. You drive down a country road for an hour, you'd have to clean off your windshield. Nowadays, you can drive for hours and hours and maybe have 1-2 splats on the windshield. Well, those are the insects that these swifts and other swallows and nightjars would eat. If we're losing those, they're losing their food base, and they've got to find food. So either they, stop reproducing, or they shift to other areas. But insect populations are pretty much tanking all over. So climate change is serious. I don't want to minimize that. I mean, it's the issue of our lifetime. But these insects, I think, are something we really need to take a look at. And a lot of the insect declines very well may be linked to our excessive use of pesticides. So again, the reduced use of pesticides just helps a lot.
And also, just the amount of area that in the U.S. that's maintained is lawn, so that the loss of native plants to monocultures,
right?
So it reverberates up to these species as well.
And it'd really be great if we could sort of make some inroads with these development companies that do these subdivisions. Just had a huge swath of woods taken out over the last year or so, new houses going up real near me. And of course they put down the turf lawns, they bring it on trucks and roll it out, do all that. And then you have the companies come in and spray all the chemicals on it. So you've lost the forest and that absorption capability. And now you've created these monoculture turf lawns where things run off, get into the waterway, end up in the Chesapeake. It's just this vicious cycle that if you could sort of start to get on the other side of that curve, you'd do a lot better. But that's, these systems that are in place are very hard to change. But I think individuals can speak up and do what they can do. And then hopefully it's that, grassroots, so to speak, level type of progress that then spreads. I mean, that's usually how things work, is from the grassroots level. So do everything you can and tell everyone what you're doing and how they can help as well.
In terms of climate change, when you speak of, when we think of species moving north, I'm thinking just from a Maryland perspective. What is the possibility that at least in Maryland we might lose any of these species as their range shifts? So maybe less of a global or regional perspective and just looking more at our area.
So if you
Will
look
there
at
be
Kestrels
in Maryland in 30 years?
Well, if you look at those range maps and where Kestrels and barn owls both are right now, they go all the way down to Florida. So I think, as things shift, and Kestrels have all these subspecies all over the place, and the natural world is not static. It's very fluid. So species adapt and move and change. I think barn owls and kestrels will be probably okay just because Actually, both are found down into the tropics. So they'll be able to adapt in one way or another, one subspecies or another, maybe a new subspecies as things move up. Chimney swifts, I think you can find those all throughout the South as well. So I think those three species in particular are probably, they'll still be around here. It's things like our state bird that we need to worry about. If you look, and I think Audubon has done some of this modeling, you look where they were 50 years ago, 30 years ago, 10 years ago, they've been shifting northward slowly. Now, a lot of this modeling stuff is kind of beyond my grasp. So I don't know if it's just naturally they're all just going to keep going and not be here, or if there will be some modifications that they will adapt to different food sources, different tree species. But what's been happening so far, things like Baltimore Oriole are moving northward. It may not be within our lifetime, but our grandkids maybe might not have their state bird living in their state. And
or the state butterfly.
Or the butterfly, yeah. Because they're so tied to plants, as the plant species and all that distribution starts shifting northward, I think we're going to see a lot of other things disappear.
Well, I think we have gone through all the questions. I did want to leave on one note of hope, which comes from Joanne in Baltimore County in the chat, because she noted that she has had swifts nesting in her chimney for at least 20 years, which is awesome.
Oh, that's great.
She also said that she sees a kestrel near her house regularly, as recently as this week. So
nice.
Let that be just a call to action to everyone to get out there and look and try to find these species in your neighborhood. Maybe take a nighttime walk or just go out at dusk in an old town with old houses, looking at the chimneys to see what you can see. It's the perfect time of year for that. So,
yeah, you won't regret it.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Chris, for all the great information. We really appreciate it.
Thanks again for having me.